Brexit broke
Britain.
Hello, I'm Peter Cook of Reboot Britain. In this film series we're doing a Brexit stocktake. For now, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, share the film, find us on social media and give us a tip if you want to help us continue the work. All the links are in the YouTube description below the film. In this film we look at the social impacts of Brexit, including things like immigration, social care, the cost of living, freedom and various other things, lest they be forgotten by the sheer pace of government gaslighting and dead cattery. For example, Lee Anderson's latest call to bring back hanging in the anti-growth coalition, which at the last count is up to 68 million people in Britain. A key component of the Brexit vote was the trumped-up concern over immigration. Research by UK and a Changing Europe demonstrates that the 6 years of austerity from 2010 produced a toxic set of conditions for people to blame austerity on immigrants. Indeed, analysts assess that the Brexit vote swung up to 12% by this element alone. Thus, the Brexit vote might have been 60-40 in favour of remaining in the EU without 6 years of Tory-sponsored austerity, and not 48-52. But there we have it. The media colluded in the cover-up for their own ends and so on. But we are where we are, as they say, and many people think there's nothing we can do about it. It's a condition I call learned helplessness. We can do lots about it. In hard times, xenophobia is a hardy perennial, as people look outside themselves for people to blame for their own circumstances. One only has to think about the Nazis' demonisation of the Jews to understand how powerful the idea of othering is. Boris Johnson and the Tory government understood this well. They used George Orwell's book 1984 not as a warning, but as an instruction manual to get Brexit done. Partly by fear and partly out of the false narrative that Brexit was a project and it could be then done and forgotten. Johnson must have thanked his lucky stars when COVID struck, seizing the virus as an opportunity to try to get people to forget about Brexit. It is well known in counselling circles that when a client is confused or nervous, they will take any advice from someone who appears to be an authority figure. So it was with COVID and Brexit, powered by fear and the promise that once done, the word Brexit would never be heard again. Suella Braverman continued Priti Patel's war on immigrants, targeting weak minds using the far-right media by demonising people fleeing from terror, and failing to differentiate between those that come here fleeing from war from a very small percentage that came here for other reasons, and an even smaller percentage intent on criminal activity. These are the people that Nigel mentions, Nigel Farage, every time. He says all of them. No, it's a very, very small percentage. Of course, Braverman is not so brave. She sidesteps the issue that Britain also has criminals because this would be an inconvenient truth. This panders to the right-wing media narrative that the only criminals in Britain are foreigners. But hey, I'm here to help. Here's an algorithm that shows Braverman what she should be doing on immigration if she was doing her job properly. First of all, provide safe routes to get rid of the traffickers. Secondly, provide safe routes to get rid of the traffickers. And thirdly, provide safe routes to get rid of the traffickers. Now, contrary to popular belief, nearly 90% of the people arriving in Britain are legal refugees fleeing from terror. Contrary to what Risky Sunak says, a recent credible poll by Statista stated that less than 10% of British people are concerned about immigration. Sunak claims it's at the top of everyone's minds. It's a bare-faced lie, Rishi. Talking with Brexiteers, they are enraged that asylum seekers are put in expensive hotels. Of course, this is quite a reasonable objection, but there's absolutely no reason why these people shouldn't be allowed to work or integrate with society. In fact, incarcerating them in hotels serves the Tories very well, as it builds up resentment and fear of the others. So, on the left hand of the algorithm, you'll see a simple system for handling migration that doesn't take 6 months per applicant to do. It involves first assessing people's knowledge, skills and experience, then looks at what we have in terms of our needs for workers in different regions of the country, and then of course placing people, supporting and integrating them. But our Go Home Office simply does not want to solve the problem, as it feeds the government's racist agenda. Part of the reason we have such terrible racism in Britain is because we don't provide any sensible induction for people coming here from other countries. Thus, people who don't have access to English find it difficult to integrate. Other countries deal with this problem properly. The right-hand side of our algorithm is a bit more complex. Included in the 10% that remain are, of course, people with criminal records. But there's a huge difference between someone who committed a parking offence in Iraq and someone who's a mass murderer, and we should properly treat these people differently. In other words, exceptions are dealt with by making exceptions to policy, not by making exceptions government policy. Instead of this, we have a blanket system that sends everyone to Rwanda with no recourse to justice or return to Britain if their case is found to be legal. This is shameful. It must stop. Setting aside the moral and legal arguments for doing things properly, each Rwanda flight costs £500,000, or what I now call a truss. This was the cost of Liz Truss's private jet to Australia, when a first-class return flight cost just £9,500. Then there are the hotel costs of nearly £6 million a day for asylum seekers, or 12 trusses. The legal challenges will also cost the earth. I seriously doubt that anyone will actually end up going to Rwanda, save for Suella Braverman and Priti Patel, who really should be locked up there. But on financial grounds alone, asylum seekers should largely become active members of society rather than remaining citizens of nowhere in limbo. All of the costs associated with state-sponsored racism is money that could be better spent on social care, our NHS, staffing our businesses and growing our failing Brexit economy. Then there is the issue of foreign citizens living in Britain and Britizens abroad. Please read Eleanor Remigi's work on In Limbo and Alice Boulier's work on British citizens living abroad for more on this. Do check our music video In Limbo for an understanding of the perspective of people left outside alone, or citizens of nowhere. Coming up, we'll be discussing Professor Joshua Silver's initiative to demonstrate, beyond doubt, that it was illegal for the UK government to declare us citizens of nowhere. Commercial break. If you find this film helpful, please send us a tip on GoFundMe, Patreon or PayPal. Check our books out, which will help you convert more people to banish Brexit and rejoin the EU. Reboot Britain provides thought leadership on how we will rejoin the EU, plus a practical guide to changing minds on Brexit, which must happen if we're to persuade politicians of the need. Private Eyelines, Have I Got Fake Brexit News for You, parodies our populist media, which fed the lies to people on Brexit and the EU, including a detailed fact and fiction decoder to help you banish Brexit bullshit and banter. Find them on Etsy or via the website brexitrage.com. Please also like, subscribe and share this film. Thank you very much in advance. Turning our attention to social care, Boris Johnson's careless decisions led to at least 30,000 unnecessary COVID deaths. In January 2020, when Angela Merkel was talking to scientists and experts about COVID, Boris Johnson was bonging Big Ben, hiding in fridges to pretend that Brexit was done, and avoiding attendance at Cobra committees. Putting infected COVID patients into care homes was a political choice, made in the full knowledge that it would kill many vulnerable people. Comparisons with Nazi atrocities in World War II are not completely inappropriate, even if the numbers affected do differ. Infecting vulnerable people was a deliberate choice on the part of Johnson, Hancock et al., and they should be on trial in The Hague for their crimes. Instead, Hancock went to the jungle. He got paid £400,000 for his stunt, gave a mere 3% of this to charity, having told us he was going to donate all the proceeds. In 2011, the Deal Not report concluded that the adult social care system was not fit for purpose and required more funding, both from individuals and the state, for it to be sustainable. In 2021, Boris Johnson announced that national insurance would be increased in order to pay for social care, alongside other increases to pay for NHS uplift. Some $12 billion was to be paid to support social care. Of course, this was cancelled by Liz Truss in September 2022 during her disastrous 46 days of office at an eye-watering cost of $73 billion to the taxpayer. I met a woman recently in a cafe who said she'd voted for Nigel Farage because he said that Brexit would mean vulnerable people with care needs would get better treatment. Of course, Nigel lied. She told me that since Nigel seemed to be a nice bloke, she believed him. I had to spend an awful lot of time Brexercising her, explaining slowly that liking someone is different to whether they are honest. Eventually, she agreed that Nigel did say what she wanted to hear, and this was because her own lived experience lined up with what I'd explained to her about vulnerable people and Brexit. She had a child with special needs, so she was able to make that judgment, but it hadn't occurred to her until she was woken up. The Deal Not report became the Did Nothing report under successive Tory governments. Theresa May promised to raise the threshold of savings that you could keep whilst in care to £100,000 from £22,500, but even this came to nothing. By the way, we still haven't had the so-called Brexit bonus of £350 million every week for the NHS. That's £18.2 billion every year. At the moment, we should be £54 billion up on savings from Brexit to pay for our NHS. As Boris might have said, alas, I forgot to pay the NHS chicks. But if I had stayed in power, I would ask Carrie to send some rescue dogs, rescue Dylan, cardboard hospitals, and I would have played doctors and nurses with her. So it's simply not true to say there is no money down the back of the Tory sofas to pay for social care or NHS, an improved immigration system, and many, many more things. Much of the time, the problem is that our money is put down the back of the Tory sofas to be taken by other Tories to spend on themselves, such as the Michelle Mone PPE scandal, Liz Truss's helicopters, private jets, and so on. Moving on to the cost of living crisis, there's been quite a lot of misinformation spread about the idea that COVID and the war in Ukraine are the sole contributors to our current cost of living crisis. Martin Lewis pointed out the energy cost hike in late 2021. This was long before Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Brexit played its part in our food inflation story to the tune of 15% on average and a lot more in some cases on food. If you've ever visited a fish and chip shop or takeaway recently, you'll notice the price increases. Talking with the owners of these businesses reveals the fact that many items now are much, much more expensive. And for example, eggs have risen in price 7 times in our Brexit souffle. As mentioned in our previous film, Brexit also contributed a loss of about 4.5% on GDP, and this loss represents a serious dent in Britain's resilience. It will also last long into the future. In other words, it's not a one-off item, or what is glibly called a bump in the road by Michael Gove. Whenever I talk to Brexiteers, virtually the only thing they can mention as a benefit of Brexit is the idea of freedom from EU laws. We're about to put all the EU laws on a bonfire, and the outcome from this event is, like Liz Truss, as yet unknown. This seems to be done because of the Tory Brexit ideology or religion, which says that anything coming from Europe must be bad. Yet it was our own UK politicians that initiated or contributed to 98% of the EU laws which we're about to set fire to. Brexit is an act of vandalism on a grand scale, and its full effects are not even visible to all. We will look at the particular legal ramifications of becoming a rogue state in a future film on the legal aspects of Brexit.
Brexit broke Britain.
We can draw the following conclusions from our social stocktake of Brexit Britain. The Brexit vote would not have been won without 6 years of Tory-led austerity. The racism which pushed Brexit over the line has not receded with the monoculture of neo-fascists inhabiting the Tory party. Lee Anderson is now deputy party chair, precisely because he will appeal to the hard right with fancy talk about electric chairs, drowning kids and so on. All the while, nearly all moderate Tories have been purged from the party. These are the tactics of the Third Reich. There are perfectly good solutions to migration, but they don't fit with Suella Braverman's need to feed red meat to knuckle-dragging racists in Britain. Boris Johnson killed at least 30,000 vulnerable people with his careless COVID strategy. Now he's claiming millions of pounds to speak about his time as PM instead of doing his job as an MP. This is an outrage.
Brexit broke Britain.
Meanwhile, the promised uplift for social care never happened. Instead, Liz Truss gambled it away on her experiment in hard Brexit economics. Social care is a ticking time bomb with our demographics spread in Britain, and successive Tory governments have swept it under the carpet. Oh yes, and we're still waiting for that Brexit bonus for the NHS. There's plenty of money to pay teachers, firefighters, nurses, carers and other professions who have seen their wages fall in real terms since the Tories came to power. None of these pay rises are inflationary when compared with the billions lost to Brexit and other inefficiencies. If we can afford to send tanks to Ukraine, which I believe we must do, we can also afford to pay public servants properly. Brexit has played a significant part in our cost of living crisis, placing a heavy burden on food prices, inflation, a permanent hit to GDP and so on. COVID was a blip when compared to Brexit, and the joint effect is what I termed a Britastrophe one day in the shower. We have still to bake in freedom of movement restrictions via visa and other elements of Boris Johnson's oven-ready Brexit. Citizens' rights for EU citizens in Britain and British citizens in Europe remain unresolved issues. Professor Joshua Silver has an ongoing legal case to demonstrate that it was illegal of the British government to remove our rights as EU citizens at present. If this is proved, it will affect every single one of us, that's 67 million people in Britain. Check up on his website to find out more. In the next film, we're going to look at the legal impacts of Brexit. If you find this film helpful, please send us a tip, check our books and music out. Please also like, subscribe and share this film. Thanks very much in advance. For now, do enjoy your newfound Brexit freedoms.
Brexit broke Britain. Brexit Britain broke.